Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome to winter at the Alpine Mountain Zoo. In today's episode, as well as looking at the best way to turn your zoo into a winter wonderland like this, we're going to be building the final habitat in the Himalayan Pass for one of the most mysterious and beautiful animals in the world, the snow leopard. Christmas is fast approaching, which means it's time to change the seasons in the zoo from autumn to winter. We're going to do that in a variety of ways, starting with these. This is the Dead Trees blueprint by Romano Palacios, and we're going to be taking some of these trees and customizing them to match all the deciduous trees that we have in the zoo, and then we're going to replace every deciduous tree in the zoo with one of these new leafless trees. It's a lot of work, but it's something I've been preparing for since we started the zoo. We did it in autumn, and we're going to do it again now. And honestly, it makes such a difference when you just see a sea of evergreen trees and then leafless trees in the snow. It brings a completely new vibe to the zoo, and I think it looks pretty amazing when it's done. This will be the replacement for our mighty oak. We had these oak trees in the zoo to begin with, and then we covered them all in tiny little autumnal trees to make them go red. And now we're replacing it with this. And I built more of these for the other types of deciduous trees that we have in the zoo. You can see 3 of them here. So once we've got some trees sculpted to match the trees that we have, we'll just go around the zoo and replace all those. And then we'll move on to the next stage, the snow. So obviously we can make it snow in this zoo with a click of a button. The problem is, what happens when it finishes snowing? This map is actually a temperate map. When we change the weather to cloudy, then the ambient temperature is 19 degrees, which means the snow melts instantly as soon as it stops snowing. So in order to keep the snow here, we're going to have to cover the entire zoo in coolers. We'll be burying coolers across most of the map so that the snow sticks around once it stops snowing. We're going to pay careful attention to where we place them, so that in areas where the zoo would clear the snow, like the paths and the habitats of the few animals that we have in the zoo that wouldn't enjoy it, won't have coolers or settled snow. And this is what it looks like. The way the winter trees are silhouetted by the snow looks absolutely amazing. But of course, we don't want it snowing all the time. Trying to build when it's snowing for a start is an absolute nightmare because it's very hard to see. Once the snow stops, thanks to our coolers, we can now see the zoo with snow lying on the ground, but no snowflakes getting in the way, including our baby foal, who, thanks to your input, is now called Epona, classic horse name for Zelda fans. And our little red panda babies are called Bobby and Priya. We have some new babies as well. Our seals have had their first little pup. And oh my god, he is insanely cute. What a little chonker. And the goats have had a baby as well. He's a little dude, so he'll be leaving the zoo once he grows up, but I'd love to hear name ideas for the seal. And in the meantime, it's time to build a habitat for the snow leopard. We started the Himalayan Pass almost 3 months ago, and since then we've built habitats for honey badger, red panda, nilgai, dhole, and brown bear. And today we're going to build the climax of the area for one of my favourite animals, the snow leopard. This habitat sits just past the end of the big temple that we've been building, so it's going to look pretty different to the other habitats, but still in keeping with the vibe of the area. We're going to be building it almost entirely out of dark wood, which goes nicely with all the highlights on the temple building itself. And it's going to be based on a real habitat where I had the most amazing snow leopard experience of my zoo-going life, and it was at Planckendael in Belgium. I went there in September, and having been lucky enough to occasionally see snow leopards asleep on a rock, asleep in a cave, asleep up a tree, and on one memorable occasion, awake but not moving on a tree at Planckendael. For the first time ever, I saw an active snow leopard. He was walking around his habitat, jumping up into trees, climbing his climbing frames, hunting for food. He seemed to be having a whale of a time, and it was absolutely amazing to see one actually up and about. Now, I'm not saying that therefore Planckendael's is the best snow leopard habitat I've ever seen, although it is a really nice one, but I thought the vibe that they had for the habitat would fit perfectly into this area. It's a very simple wooden construction, but really nicely laid out, adorned with Asian-style flags and subtle mountain-style decorations, so it's going to fit perfectly into this area. We're building it into the side of the mountain here, A, because that's kind of the point of this area, and B, because lots and lots of terrain changes and verticality in the habitat is really important for snow leopards. Spending their entire lives in the mountains of Asia, mostly way up. They are all about climbing rock faces. They're also very, very shy, probably the shyest of all the big cats. So we want to make sure they have areas of their habitat where they can get out of sight of the guests, which is something we'll consider when we're building. So what are we building? This one piece here is the front of the habitat and the viewing area. And it also includes a little standoff area to make sure the guests don't get too close to the snow leopard. And now that we've built this one section, we can just copy it and curve it around this path to form the whole of the viewing area and the majority of the front of the habitat. We've got some mesh in here using the Oceanian netting, which works really nicely for mesh, probably better than the mesh pieces for most cases, I think. And this is pretty much exactly how it works at Planckendael with this curved front viewing, except that we need this to be next to quite a major path. So I've made the inside of the viewing area a little smaller. There's some seating and things like that at Planckendael, but we're going to dispense with that so we can make sure people can still get past this habitat and into the Lost Wilds. This is how it's shaping up. It's starting to look nice, but there's not really enough space on that path for people to get past, so we'll make a few adjustments there and make sure there is enough room for people, and just generally tidy up how it looks, and then we'll move on to adding in the barriers. So the way it's going to work is that there is mesh barriers at either end of the viewing area and then glass in the middle. That means that the guests can get a pretty much perfect view of the snow leopard through the glass sections, and then they can have a different experience looking through the mesh where they can see the leopard directly through the holes in the mesh. When I was at Planckendael, the leopard came right up to one of the bits of mesh when I was stood next to it, so I was only a few feet away from it, and it was pretty amazing. So I want to make that a possibility here. And then for the rest of the barriers around the side and the back, they will all be mesh, and we'll just put these in and join them up with the edge of the pieces that we've added in here. And later on, we're going to use one of our favourite blueprints to complete the roof. This took a long time to build. I actually started it before doing all the work to turn the zoo into winter, which is why it's been looking a bit less snowy. But here we are, winter has arrived, and we can continue the build. Man, these guests, maybe if you'd worn more appropriate clothes, you wouldn't be so cold. Nothing we can do about that, sadly. Let's move on to the roof. I experimented with a slightly rising roof to the mesh here, but it was just nowhere near enough height to it with the big slope of the mountain, so I decided it was definitely time for Just Goron's netting roof blueprint. We've used this a couple of times before, basically because it is an incredible build, and creating a curved mesh roof like this quite frankly scares me. And even if I could work out how to do it, this episode would have been out at some point during 2026. So we're going to be using this blueprint. There's still a lot of work to do though, because we're going to join each one of these supports up with the fences that we've placed in to make it all look seamless. Now, thanks as always to Goron for putting this amazing piece on the workshop. All right, time to turn this big pile of wood and metal into something a bit more attractive. Something I really liked at Planckendael were these large grasses that they had growing in between the path and the habitat. They pretty much filled in the kind of standoff area that was there. I want to try and replicate that here, so we're using the daffodil stems and one of the plants from New Zealand that I forget the name of, but it's got one of those very unique names that you often find in plants and animals in New Zealand. And we'll just make a nice group of these. And once we've got something that we're happy with, then we can turn it into an actual group and start placing it around the borders of the habitat. And while we do that, we should probably talk about the fact that it's Wednesday, and it's been over 2 weeks since the last episode of the Alpine Mountain Zoo. So firstly, thank you so much for your understanding with the new schedule, or lack thereof, that I spoke about in the last episode. I've had so many supportive comments from people. I was pretty confident that you would understand, because you are incredible, intelligent people, but it was still kind of nerve-wracking making the announcement, so it's been great reading all your comments about that. Once every 2 or 3 weeks probably is where we're going to be at with the Alpine Mountain Zoo in future, but that will enable me to make sure that we have full episodes with builds that I'm happy with, that I've had the time to get right, while still giving me time to make videos for Jurassic World Evolution as well. It still feels weird to me going a Saturday without releasing a Planet Zoo episode, but that's something we'll just have to get used to for the foreseeable future, until Planet Zoo 2 comes along anyway. So thanks again for your understanding. Back to the build, we're going to use some sunken beech trees to create bushes going around the sides of the habitat. They help block out the mesh. This is what they did at Planckendael. Just makes it look a lot more attractive. And these beech trees do a really good job of standing in for that kind of bush. They've got some nice dark leaves on them, which makes them look like the kind of bush that would still have leaves during winter. And we should probably talk about the snow leopard itself. So we're just going to have the one snow leopard in here. You do not keep them together. They are very solitary, and they can be particularly aggressive to each other. If you want to breed snow leopards, you have them in separate habitats and then just introduce them at appropriate times and prey, I would imagine. So as well as this habitat, we're going to have a second off-show habitat for a female, which you'll see a little glimpse of at the end, but we won't spend much time actually building it in the episode, because it's just going to be a simplified version of this one. This is going to be the main habitat that's on show where our male will live, and then we will introduce them to breed. And when hopefully we get some little snow leopard cubs, then the female and the cubs will move into this habitat and the male will go off show. Also kind of functions as enrichment for the leopards, I guess. They get to spend time in different habitats. We also need a holding area for them, which is what we're building here. Snow leopards will be happy outside year-round. They experience pretty much all the weathers in the mountains where they live. but the keepers would still need to be able to get into the habitat to clean it, and you don't want to be just wandering around with a snow leopard in there. So we'll just build a little holding where they could go when the habitat's being cleaned before they go back into the habitat proper again. And then we're going to move on and build a little cave for them. At Chester Zoo, the indoor area for their snow leopards is themed like a cave, and I really like that, and that gave them the idea to build an actual kind of rockwork cave in the habitat where they could spend time. They want to get out of the elements. So we'll put some of the bedding down to encourage them to actually use this place to sleep, and then we'll cover it up with one of the faux rock arches, and then we'll build a load of rockwork around it and try and blend that in with the faux rock arch so it all looks like one piece. I'm going to use the tundra rocks for this, which is a set of rocks I very rarely use. They're really dark, but I thought that would make a nice contrast with the rest of the rock work, which is going to be more of the tiger rocks that we normally prefer. Just makes the cave stand out a bit, and we'll use our big lump of rocks that we use throughout the zoo and just position that until it starts melding in with the cave and getting us a kind of mini mountain range at the back of the habitat, leading up to the actual mountain behind it. If you're enjoying this video, by the way, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you're wondering why I always say that, I don't think I've ever actually explained it. If you hit the like button, it makes YouTube far more likely to recommend the next video I do to you, because you do not get recommendations from all of the channels that you're subscribed to on your homepage. YouTube basically makes a call as to whether to recommend it to you or not, and hitting the like button on the last video will make that much more likely. We'll put some more of the tundra rocks on the inside of the cave to make sure it's a bit darker in there, just to kind of help with Planet Zoo's lack of any kind of interior lighting, and then we'll move on to the climbing. This is going to be quite tricky. I want to replicate the climbing from the Planckendael habitat, which is lots of kind of logs and branches and things like that they've secured together to turn into a climbing frame for the leopard. So it looks really natural, really attractive. The snow leopard there certainly seems to enjoy it from what I saw, but it means using lots and lots of climbable items together rather than just having a couple of logs or whatever. So this will take a lot of fiddling around with off camera to get it to work. But you can see it working in the end cinematics. This is based on an old dead tree that we made back in San Bernardino Zoo, which is one of those blueprints I like to return to because I'm really happy with how it looks, and the number of climbable branches that we have in the game is really limited, so no point in trying to continually reinvent the wheel when you've only got a small number of pieces to work with. But we're going to do a little bit of modifying and then use 3 of these in various different configurations to create a climbing frame, and then we're going to have a big climbable log across the middle of it just to make sure that the leopard actually uses it. Big tip to remember when you're building your own climbing frames is that if you overlap the climbable pieces, for instance this big log in the middle here, you can get lots of problems where the animals won't use them. So make sure the climbable elements are meeting exactly and not overlapping, and then move the next element to meet it rather than overlapping them, and you should get climbing that works much better. That's the climbing done, so we'll put some bracken in just to sit it into its surroundings. And then you know what time it is. It is time to add the buffalo grass. There we go, things are starting to look better. Let's get some final foliage in and start moving this habitat towards being completed. We'll drop in some of our alpine foliage that we've used throughout the zoo, and that's the male's habitat pretty much done. We will quickly put together a off-show habitat for the female, so just using Goron's netting again and drawing fences around it to meet up with all the various different struts that come down from the center, and then we'll drop in everything we already built for the male. Put this up on the mountain close to the male's habitat, just behind the stairs that come down from the bear viewing, and then we'll surround it with more of our beech tree bushes to make sure it is off-show. And the last thing we're going to do is some work on these stairs, start getting this area finished off. These rocks are a modified version of the walls of the bear habitat. They tie the area in nicely and just cover up the curbs on the edge of the stairs. We need to change the colour of those stairs as well. I've just noticed the steps are kind of much lighter grey than the floor, so we'll change that. And then we'll take a look at the habitat. Despite the lack of any white walls, I think this ties in really nicely with the rest of the area. The guests are in. Let's take a look at the snow leopard. Here he comes, walking down from his cave. For some reason I thought the snow leopard model in this game was terrible. I haven't seen it since Tekton Zoo, but when I looked at it, just look at that face. It's actually not bad. Pretty much all the base game cats, with the exception of the female lion, in my opinion, are not great. But I think the snow leopard's no worse than the others. It might even be a little bit better than the tiger. Maybe it's the snow that helps. I think he looks really good here. And it took a lot of fiddling, but I'm really happy that the climbing works as well. He's got a pumpkin feeder, which he's going to go and have a little munch on now. Let's take a look at him in the snow. I'm often guilty of overusing the word majestic, and I'm going to do it again. He looks absolutely majestic in the snow. Great to have the snow leopards back in the zoo again. This is where we started today. And with 2 habitats for once, this is where we are now. Thank you so much for watching as always. Thanks especially to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club. Members of the Explorers Club are going to get a little extra video as a treat just before Christmas. And I'll see you again next year for some more Planet Zoo.